The Bond films have had an immense impact on the shape of nearly all the action-adventure films which have followed them. The series developed the concept and style of seriously delivered ironic escapism well beyond anything that had been produced up to that point, set the benchmark for other productions, and made others seem camp or lacking by comparison. It is difficult to analyse or define the exact nature of the appeal of the Bond films, but for me, the essential factor, certainly in the earlier films, is their knowing approach to the telling of a ridiculous tale which is seriously told. This seriously jocular approach carries the base material to a higher cinematic plane. The books were well-written adventure stories which were fun and engaging, but their cinematic interpretations managed to combine adventure with a knowing self-mockery and complicit humour, adding an element of wit and entertainment missing from the original material. Exotic and ridiculous situations are set up with great care, attention to detail and atmosphere, and above all with due regard for the serious development of character and storyline. Then, after considerable effort to be convincing, clever dialogue or even simply a reaction from one of the characters suggests that the makers and actors are well aware that this is all just a bit of concocted fun after all, and are willing to share the joke with the audience. This is, I think, a key element in explaining the appeal and success of the early Bond films. The audience is party to the joke, while Bond's adversaries are not. The audience wants to identify with the hero, and in a sense the Bond films allowed the audience to be involved with him and the plot through conspiratorial humour. In this respect, the producers chose the perfect incarnation of Bond in Sean Connery. Connery was a master of effortlessly conveying ironic remarks which only the audience could truly or completely understand due to its fuller knowledge of events and characters in the film. He managed to combine perfectly lightness and seriousness. He achieved a sense of authenticity and humanity through a series of carefully observed reactions and tics, yet regularly reminded us that what we are watching is an elaborate joke, be it through the dialogue itself, the way it's delivered, or just a look. As the series progressed, it must have been difficult to maintain the quality of the writing, and indeed the jokes, though still present, became largely just that, jokes, rather than witty and knowing reminders that this is all a set-up created for our entertainment. Of course, the original style does not suit every actor, and those who went on to play the role played to their strengths. But with the gradual disappearance of this knowing humour, the series became weaker and increasingly dependent on other factors. The films may have remained enjoyable, but they are undoubtedly less witty and playful than they once were. Even the general ambiance of lightness and fun was diluted to a great extent in the more recent additions to the series. Essentially, they remained fantastic tales told seriously with flashes of fun and humour to indicate they should not be taken too seriously. But over the years there have been attempts to incorporate greater psychological depth in the principal characters and the storylines. Of course, if the audience doesn't care about the fate of the principal character, the whole exercise becomes somewhat pointless. It is essential then to have the central character show human characteristics which can inspire empathy. This can be achieved by means of showing reaction to a particular situation, revealing inner feelings and attitudes. However, in Timothy Dalton's and Pierce Brosnan's outings, and especially in the Daniel Craig cycle, there was an attempt to dig more deeply into potential character flaws or personal weaknesses in Bond, giving him greater psychological depth. I seem to remember reading that for Fleming, Bond was always intended as a fairly nondescript hook for a good story. I think the same theory might apply to the films. Clearly, it would be damaging to the film not to have Bond show human characteristics, but it can be equally damaging, given the original premise of irony, fun and entertainment, to dig too deeply into the psyche of what was intended to be an instrument of entertainment. The early films have a unique flavour and style, and it was with these films that I grew up. It is perhaps unfair to compare the later Bonds, which played to the strengths of the lead actor, but I think it is fair to say that while the early Bonds were innovative and led a virtual revolution in cinema entertainment, the later films have become somewhat derivative, not just of themselves, but of the very films which were inspired by the style of the Bond originals. Much though I enjoyed the later films and Daniel Craig's Human Hero, for me these were not Bond films. They were engaging action adventures whose main character was called James Bond, but this was not the Bond I grew up with and supported for years. I recognise this as a generational issue, but it is also an issue of integrity and recognition of the qualities millions of fans admired for decades, qualities that were cast aside in favour of a Jason Bourne intensity and gravity. Indeed, one might even call him Born-Again Bond. Clearly, modern cinemagoers were willing to accept the Daniel Craig iteration as a definitive and psychologically more developed version of Bond, but I found this derivative and forced. I think it was a fundamental mistake to try to make Bond's backstory the focus for the films. The character is simply not complex or strong enough, and to create a personal link between Bond and Blofeld borders on soap opera and diminishes Blofeld's criminal psychological profile to that of a jealous stepbrother, of sorts. In my opinion, Bond was at his best and most original when he fulfilled his mission professionally and entertainingly, and the films were delivered with conspiratorial humour and witty playfulness, while Bond himself was made incidentally human, responding to events and people, and whose backstory and character were not the focus of the storyline. My thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it of some value.